Here's another question from the audience. This person asks, my son is gay, and I'm not sure he's a Christian, which concerns me. I love him dearly, but I'm so afraid that we will not meet in the afterlife. How do I approach him? Whew. Okay, first of all, dear mom, as a fellow parent, I just want to empathize with you for a moment and say, I don't think there's anything that can compare to the ways in which our emotional responses, when they have to do with our kids, they get amplified to the max. Meaning there's love, and then there's the love we have for our kids. There's anxiety, and then there's the anxiety we feel about our kids. There's joy, and then there's the joy that we feel around our kids. You know what I mean? It's like everything just kind of gets turned up to 11, doesn't it? So what I'm hearing in your question is a number of feelings: uncertainty, fear, anxiety, love, curiosity, hope even. And because it's related to your son, I imagine all of these feel extra big. And so I'm really proud of you for not only letting yourself feel them, but then for seeking help to try and do good by your son. So all that being said, there is a lot to unpack here. So let's discuss it, shall we? All right, so unfortunately, I don't have all the information behind this question, nor can I ask some clarifying questions. For example, when you say that you're not sure if your son is a Christian, do you mean that, one, like his identity as a gay person causes you to question whether or not he even can be a Christian? Or two, you're just unsure whether or not he identifies as a Christian? Now, I'm unclear whether or not the issue, if that makes sense, is that you struggle to reconcile someone's sexual orientation, like homosexuality, with their religious affiliation, or if you're just not sure whether your son, who happens to be gay, still adheres to the religious tradition that I'm assuming you raised them in. So let me just address both of these so that we cover all the bases here. So first, can a person be gay and Christian? Well, if this is where your uncertainty lies, wondering, can my son both be gay and Christian? Then let me try and put that to rest. Yes, of course a person can be both gay and Christian. Like, it happens all the time. I know many, many people for whom this is true. Now, it's likely, if this is the question you're asking, that you've been conditioned to believe that these two things, gay and Christian, are incompatible. And that's probably because you come from a tradition that has a very specific view of the Bible, as well as probably an ignorant or at least limited view of human sexuality. So you've probably been told or taught that the Bible has these prohibitions and condemnations against homosexuality, and that the only kind of relationship that God blesses is a marriage between one man and one woman. But that's just not the case. Like, the Bible really doesn't have anything to say about homosexuality in terms of a person's sexual orientation. And then what it does have to say about same-sex sex acts is, it's very specific, okay? So a couple things real quick. Here's what the Bible does have to say. Number one, it condemns using forced sex as a way to humiliate and dominate other people. And this comes from Genesis and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Number two, the Bible has laws that outlawed married men of the tribe of Levi from Leviticus. Anyways, tribe. I'm probably not going to edit that out. We're going to leave that in. Laws that outlawed married men from the tribe of Levi from having sex with men instead of their wives. This comes from the book of Leviticus. And then in Romans 1, you've got Paul, who is pretending to parrot these well-known anti-Gentile prejudices, ones that were commonly held by many of the Jews of his time. He was parroting them and writing about them as a way to expose the destructive nature of judgmentalism that was happening within the Jewish Christians in Rome. And of course, some of those prejudices very much were judgmental attitudes towards egregious and grotesque same-sex sex acts. And then finally, in 1 Corinthians and 1 Timothy, you have a couple letters from Paul that describe very specific behaviors, including men exploiting other men sexually or engaging in transactional sex with other men as being incompatible with the values of God's kingdom. And, if anyone has more curiosity around that, you can always check out my work with Unclobber. But really quickly, in summary to the mom of this question, what does the Bible have to say about people who have innate desires and attractions towards people of the same sex? Nothing. Like, it doesn't have anything to say about that sexual orientation. And then what does the Bible have to say about people of the same sex being in a loving, committed relationship, treating each other as equals? Also nothing. So yeah, a person can most certainly be gay, and they can even be in a relationship with someone of the same sex and still follow in the ways of Jesus. These things are not mutually exclusive, even though I completely understand that you and many others have been led to believe otherwise. And then this other matter, maybe you just don't know if your son is a Christian. Maybe that is what the tension is. You just don't know if your son identifies as a Christian anymore. To that, I would start by saying, have you asked him? You know what I mean? Like, I don't mean to sound trite or dismissive, but your question says that you're not sure he's a Christian, and maybe some of that lack of clarity can be resolved by asking him. But, I'll go a little bit deeper with this response just for the sake of having maybe more to say than just that. Because I think maybe what's at stake here is that you probably have a very specific idea and a very particular view of what a Christian is. And likely this view of what a Christian is was given to you by maybe your parents or your church or some combination thereof. And so you, like all of us, have a definition of what makes a person a Christian. And so you, like many of us, probably assume that definition is the best or the right definition. Do you know what I mean? Is that people describe what makes for a Christian? Like that gets answered in a lot of different ways. Because then I think if you keep that in mind, that there's lots of different ways people answer that question, maybe the more precise question behind your question is, I'm not sure if my son is a Christian in the way that I am, or in the way that I think he should be. Getting more granular and more clear on what's actually at stake in the question can be a helpful indicator for how to move forward with regards to your question then of how do you approach him. And I'll come back to that in a minute. Now, let me say something in response to this fear that you have that you will not meet in the afterlife. First, let me just reiterate that I see you and I hear you and I feel the love that you have for your child. That's really evident. And I can't imagine what it must be like for you to hold this thought in your mind that there's this possible scenario that the two of you will spend eternity apart from each other. Like, to love something so deeply and then to imagine an existence where that love, that relationship, that connection is not only broken, but irreparably divided. Like, imagining that scenario has got to be agonizing for you. And I'm really sorry that fear shows up for you. Now, it sounds to me, again, I don't know you, but it sounds to me similar to what I mentioned a minute ago, that maybe you come from a tradition within Christianity that has taught you that there are some people who will enjoy eternal bliss in the afterlife, while others won't. And then I'd wager a guess that your understanding is that the thing that separates these two groups is what a person believes in their mind. In other words, for many Christians, the thinking is that only the people who believe the right ideas get to go to heaven, which leaves the rest of humanity who have different or wrong ideas in their minds on the outside of the pearly gates. Now, this is not the time or the place right now for a full exploration of heaven and hell and the afterlife. But I do want to say this. Remember a few moments ago when I named that agonizing reality that it must be for you as a parent to even consider existing separate from someone, especially eternally separate from someone that you love more than anything? Well, there was this time when Jesus pointed out how even like us earthly human parents who have our issues and our limitations, that even we as parents, when our child asks for bread, we don't respond by giving them rocks. You know what I mean? Or if they ask for a fish, you don't have earthly parents that give them a snake to eat. And his point here is that, look, if even earthly parents know how to love and care for and provide for their children, how much more do you think God does? So consider this. Whatever agony you think it would be to be separated forever from your child, just like scale it up by orders of magnitude, and you will start to get close to the heart of God. And maybe when you do that, you'll begin to just touch the edges of the possibility that maybe, just maybe, there's no version of reality. There's no potential existence or experience that could ever be where God is ever separated from God's children. Like, ever. And if that's true, and I think it is, then maybe it can bring some peace to your heart, that there's no version of the afterlife where you could truly be separated from the ones that you love. Okay, then finally to your main question of how do I approach my son? If I understand you correctly, I think what you're asking is, and I'm just having to make some assumptions here, I think you're asking, how can I make sure that my son is Christian, specifically in the way that I think he ought to be? Because I don't want to spend eternity apart from him. Now, in an ideal world, the thing I just said a minute ago about the afterlife would help alleviate some of your fears about ever being eternally separated from your loved ones. But I can appreciate the fact that those might be beliefs that are a little too far out for you. You probably have some ideas about the afterlife that are embedded pretty deeply into your mind and into your body, and that's going to take a while to dislodge, and I totally get that. So then set that aside for a second. How can you approach your son? Well, for starters, like I mentioned in the beginning, I would approach him with some curiosity. Like, ask questions. Just ask questions. Ask him questions about his faith. What does he believe? What does he think about things these days? Ask questions about his sexuality if you guys have that kind of relationship. What's it like for him to identify as gay? How has that impacted his life and his experiences? And as you ask these questions, do your best to have no agenda in the asking other than to listen. Because you might feel this urge to respond. You probably might even get defensive. Like, I know a lot of Christians who have these ideas deep in their bones, they can get defensive, but please try not to. Try not to. And if you don't think that you'll be able to sit and hear his answers without getting defensive or wanting to argue, then I would submit that you might not be ready yet to ask him questions. And maybe don't approach him yet. Wait until you are secure enough in your own self, secure enough in your own beliefs, that you're not going to feel the need to try and impose or convince him of something different. Does that make sense? And then I'd also say, in addition to approaching with curiosity, approach him with humility. And that takes me back to this, the point I made earlier about there being myriad ways that people understand Christianity. Like, so if you can, try to take ownership of your own perspective as your own perspective. Meaning, rather than assume that your definition of what a Christian is happens to be like the perfect, exact, right, true definition of what a Christian is, try and retrain your brain to think, well, this is my understanding. Now, sure, and I'm going to say this a bit tongue-in-cheek, it's possible that you happen to have it exactly right, and all the hundreds and thousands of other denominations and ways of thinking about it are somehow wrong, but probably not. Like, I'm just saying you probably don't have it exactly right. So have some humility and accept the fact that maybe someone else doesn't need to be your exact kind of Christian in order to be Christian. And then I would suggest, in addition to approaching with curiosity and humility, approach him with compassion. If I'm understanding the question properly, and we're talking about someone, your son, who maybe at one point in their life did identify as Christian, but now no longer does, there's probably some good reasons for that. And it's possible that him even being gay might have a connection to his distancing himself from the version of Christianity that maybe I'm assuming he was raised with. And if that's true, if I'm right, then that means there's some pain there. It's possible that he's experienced degrees of rejection and shame and ridicule that you and me, we can't really comprehend. So have some compassion and appreciate that he's probably walked a very hard road. And where he finds himself on his journey right now at this moment, it might actually make a lot of sense. It might actually make a lot of sense that he's put some distance between himself and Christianity right now. And then finally, the last thing, if you do approach him about this, my last thought is this: do so with open hands. Meaning, if you want to ask questions, if you want to listen and learn and seek to understand, that's great. But mama, you gotta let go. Your son's journey is not your journey, and it's not your responsibility. I invite you to entrust him to God and believe that God loves your child as much and probably more than you do. Though he may not walk the same paths that he once did, and though he may not be interested in the religious traditions that you raised him in, and though he may even be antagonistic toward your beliefs or your faith right now, ultimately he is his own person. And if you hope to maintain a lasting relationship with him, where there's mutual love and respect, then I say this with as much grace as I can muster, you got to do what you can to let go of your own desires for his life and simply choose to love him for who he is and love him for where he's at. And when you do that, I think you'll actually begin to embody and model the kind of love that God has for all of us. Those are my thoughts anyway.